Hi,
Hi.
welcome to our December edition of our podcast.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, near and far. If you are
Hmm.
an international listener, which we did just get our, Spotify wrapped info, right?
Stats
We're
back.
global, so
We
thank
are
you.
global, guys. It's official. Our top three countries on Spotify were America, Canada, and Norway. Who knew?
So
Who
loving
knew?
the northern European Isles, I guess, if
Yes,
you
yes,
will.
yes.
So we are really excited to kind of continue the December edition of some holiday classics. So today we're going to be covering The Grinch, the
Oh,
Jim Carrey version. So there's many
obviously,
versions, but
obviously.
I think at least I'm more familiar with the Jim Carrey one. Then there's the cartoon, right? The original, and then there's the new cartoon,
Yes.
which is really funny and silly too.
And the new cartoon has some pretty sick beats, has some good music. And of course, I think we were like going back and forth about do we cover the original or the Jim Carrey version? And I was glad when you agreed we should do Jim Carrey version because it's so good.
Yeah, and there's a
Like just
lot
like,
there.
yeah, just like the costuming,
Mhm.
the makeup. Like every time I watch it, I'm just looking at the Grinch. Like, did he just take 10 hours to get in this costume every day?
Probably. I mean, that is a fun fact.
Probably.
All of their like facial, right, constructions, the nose, for makeup every single day. So I went to at my dance studio growing up, the girl, I don't know her name, I should have looked, who was climbing up the mountain at the beginning with the boys to like the
Oh, like
Grinch,
the
like the
teen
opening
girls?
scene. Yeah, so she went to my dance studio.
No way.
Yeah, so I don't know if she's like been in
Wow.
things since, but that was always like so
Ooh.
exciting.
Well,
But
that's like a hot take.
yeah. Anyway,
Cool. And Taylor Momsen was so
yeah,
adorable as Cindy Lou.
I
And
know.
that's obviously like pre Gossip Girl, but then she went into Gossip Girl and then she was like the lead singer of that really intense like heavy metal band. And I'm not sure what she's doing now, but
Yeah.
um she's just so adorable
Mhm.
and was like really perfect for the role. And
Oh
I just
yeah.
loved all their hairstyles
Mhm.
and I'm assuming they were wigs, but
Yeah, I would think.
just super cool. And then Molly Shannon, of course.
I
Who doesn't love
know.
her? Oh, who
I
doesn't love her?
Some of the people like when I looked up the cast list, I was like, "Oh yeah, duh, that's them." But like their
Yeah,
makeup and, costuming was so good that it just never even crossed my mind that that was Miley
yeah.
Shannon, but like, hello, superstar.
Hello. Oh my God. We should do Superstar someday,
Yeah.
by the way, side note.
Yeah.
And then, like, I vividly remember this movie coming out. I think I was in late middle school, early high school. And it was like a year when my family was having a hard time. And that Faith Hill, Where Are You Christmas song came out. And it, like, really was like, I remember just being like, this is how I feel this year. And even still, it, like, really gets
Yeah.
you. And I think, like, really speaks to, like, how emotional the
Mm.
holiday season can be. And
Yeah.
like, as we keep talking about and emphasizing in our holiday episodes, like, that is a fact
Mm.
that holidays can be hard for people of all ages and backgrounds. And I really loved that this movie and the Grinch story in general, like, really speaks to like the real
Yeah.
meaning of the holidays and that, beyond the commercialization of it, like it stirs up a
Mm.
lot of big feelings for people and
I
that's
know.
okay.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
vividly remember hearing that song as a kid and being like, oh, like just like, oh, speaks to me,
I know. I mean, Faith Hill is such a wonderful artist, and I
Oh,
think her, it came out with the album because Cindy Lou, right, like sings it in her little beautiful voice too in the
yes,
movie. But
yes.
then the Faith Hill version, I think, was just like a tearjerker.
Whoa,
Like,
yes. And it reminds me of that song, My Grown Up Christmas List. Have you
mm,
heard that
yeah,
one? Similar, right? Where you're
yeah,
just like, it's just like really, I don't know, something about Christmas music like really gets me,
mm,
you
yeah.
know?
I'm a music crier, so like if there's,
Yes.
I'm
Like
very,
Hallelujah
yeah, I can
or like
cry easily.
a lot of the Christmas, even a lot of like the church hymns,
Hmm.
like even not for a sad reason, they're just like really moving,
Yeah.
right? Like they're so moving.
Hmm. Yeah. I
That
don't.
reminds, oh, I was just going to say that reminds me, I recently was at Disney World and they're doing a lot of their Christmas stuff right
Mm.
now. And I went to their, what they call the Candlelight Processional Show. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's at
Mm-mm.
Epcot. And so it's this like big show that's been going on for 60 years. And they have like a big choir, a
Mm.
live band, and then there's always a celebrity narrator who basically like narrates the Christian Christmas story, right? And then they sing like all the classic Christmas songs with like a huge choir. So it's like really emotional, really beautiful. And when I was there, Chrissy Metz from This Is Us was the celebrity narrator. Do you know who she is?
Yeah.
I loved This Is Us. Like if one, I feel like in our giveaway, which we'll talk about then in our episode, um, a lot of people have like
Mm.
recommended that to us over the years. But anyway, she was like bawling. She was just like so moved by the Christmas
Yeah.
story and like the big choir. And I think it's just like the music,
Mm.
right? That's just, it's like so moving. So I
She
think we
just
see
spoke
that here
at
too.
I attended the online version, but a conference for eating disorders, an education the
Really?
Renfrew conference. Yeah, she was one of the keynote speakers, just talking about her experience. And it was like a couple of people who've been very like open about their experience in a larger body and just like fat phobia and being an advocate. And
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I was really impressed with what she had to say. So that's,
Yeah.
we both kind of just saw her in two
Wow.
different ways than This Is Us.
Yeah.
So she's getting around everywhere.
That's awesome. And
Mm.
actually, I just saw on her Instagram, she's coming to New Haven with, I guess she's like, obviously she's a singer, but like, I guess with her band or something. Cool. Hey, Chrissy
Yeah.
Metz, like, we love you. Okay. Anyway, back to the Grinch. There's a lot we could talk about. So,
Mm.
what jumps out to you, Portia?
So I was, using Google as one does when they're
Of
looking
course.
for movie fun facts. And
Sure.
something that I didn't see but did pop out at me when I was watching the movie, which is kind of a controversial disorder in the
Mm,
DSM and kind of in I don't know, it's use, it's treatment, but it's a reactive attachment disorder. So I thought
yeah.
of him kind of immediately, the Grinch, with attachment, right? Like
A hundred
he kind
percent.
of came from somewhere we don't
The
know.
storks in the sky.
Yeah, and he like landed outside, and then they kind he was like cold and like alone. I think it kind of like, I don't know for how long, not a long period of time, but like it makes me think of some disrupted attachment and some neglect. And then the
Yeah.
two sisters kind of take him in. And then he kind of goes on to continue, though, to not fit in and not have these
Yeah.
connections with his peers. And so, thought just for like educational purposes, we could talk a little bit about
Yeah.
reactive
For
attachment
sure.
disorder. I've worked
I
with
think
a
that's a
couple
great idea.
kiddos over the years with it. And again, it's not common, but unfortunately, with the DSM, the current version of it, we only really have two disorders that we can like, diagnose and bill with. So it's reactive attachment disorder, and then the disinhibited social. Where did it go? Do to do disinhibited social engagement disorder. So
Hmm.
everyone really wants there to be way more attachment based disorders. It would
I
like
know.
be more gentle, I think, with explaining some behavior. So anyway,
Like from childhood to adulthood, I
yeah,
think.
totally. Um, and we've talked a lot about borderline disorder throughout our movies and
Hmm.
TV shows, and like there's a lot of talk about borderline often but not always stemming from like a
Attachment
attachment
issues.
wound. And so
Right,
anyway,
right. I
DSM
think, yeah.
6 should work on that.
Yeah. And I think, too, there's so many different schools of thought in terms of like psychological development
Mm.
or schools of thought in terms of like how do you do psychotherapy? What's sort of your lens that you see things through? And attachment's a big one. That's one that I find myself just like naturally gravitating towards. And I've noticed like we talk about it a lot on our podcast, like with
Yeah.
almost every character. You and I are really curious
Mm.
about their attachments. Like with the morning show, we were like, oh, finally we saw Corey's mom. Like we're just constantly wondering how
Yeah.
did people get to be this way? And I think like those early
Mm.
years are so important, right? Like between ages 0 and 5, that really sets the stage psychologically for how you will relate to adults.
Right.
It really like those early attachments, we talked about in our Harry Potter
Mhm.
episode with your caregivers are incredibly important. And yeah, we see the Grinch like as a baby, but like an older baby, like 6 to 12 months, I'd say.
Yeah.
based on his head control and vocalizations and things like that, like dropped off on the stoop. So like what happened before then, if anything? It's cold. And then he looks totally different from everyone else. And he's super bullied. Like all those scenes with Martha May when he's like so excited to give her the
I know.
Valentine, or not the Valentine, the Christmas angel.
Yeah.
And even the teacher,
I
I'm always
know.
like
Everyone's like
kind
that one scene, slow laughing, right? They're like,
yeah. Right. Even
yeah,
the teacher, it reminds me of Step Brothers when the mom is
yes,
gets involved when
singing the song.
Brennan has a mangina,
Mhm.
where it's just like, even the adult who's supposed to like be protecting you in that space is
Yeah.
like adding to it.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people, even if you have solid secure attachment, can relate to feeling bullied
Oh,
or like
yeah.
laughed at in school. But he really got it. And we really saw how that made him
Mm.
like isolate totally,
Right.
totally
Yeah.
isolate. And it's interesting, right? Like I think comparing, you know, how the Grinch responds to that type of early experience with, in a future episode, we're going to talk about Frozen, how Elsa responds and then isolates herself, well, it's interesting parallel
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. And a common theme in some child movies, I just
Hmm.
think it's like, something bad happens, which, I guess like it's just a good story. And then like how someone responds to that something bad happening or hard or painful. And then,
Hmm.
how they kind of manage to do it. And ideally, if it's a Disney movie, like they coped well and kind of come out the other side. But, we see that
Right.
with the Grinch. So the
Do you
reason
want to
that,
just, oh, I was just going
what,
to ask, do we want to like just say what is reactive attachment
yeah, yeah,
disorder?
yeah.
So again, when we talk about attachment, we again it's a term used to talk about the connection between an infant and their early caregiver. Usually it's
Mhm.
a parent, but not always. It can be a grandparent, it can be someone at an orphanage. It can
Mhm.
hopefully it's someone. That's like a
Yeah.
good place to start is we hope there's someone, right? Hi
Hmm.
scribbles. Um so then we think about, and we've talked about in a lot of our past episodes, like Harry Potter, a lot of different ones about the different types,
Hmm.
styles of attachment. We think about secure attachment versus insecure attachment. And then in that umbrella of insecure attachment, we think about like avoidant attachment styles versus anxious avoidant attachment styles versus like a reactive type of attachment
Yeah.
style, right? So, like when you have a secure attachment, the child knows and feels secure in knowing that their needs will be met by their caregiver. And this develops over time. Like for human babies, when you cry, your mother
Hmm.
comes to feed you, to change you, to hold you. As the baby gets older, the child begins to be able to tolerate waiting for mom because they've been able to internalize, like, even if I'm crying, I know she will eventually come to me. It's something called object permanence, where I believe it's around 18 months old, where kids can realize, like, okay, even if my mom, like, even if I don't see my mom, I know she still exists.
Hmm.
And when I need her, I know she will hear me and come to get me, even if it's not immediate. So
Right.
you develop this secure feeling like your needs will be met. When you have like insecure attachment, you don't develop that. You can't count on your needs being met. And you react to that in different ways. Like if you have an anxious attachment style, you're always kind of like wanting it to be met and not really being able to trust, like, will it be met or not? You're always anxious about it. If you have like an anxious avoidant attachment style, you have that anxiety and then you kind of avoid social interactions in adulthood. You might not like pursue, romantic partnership. You might have a hard time making long-term friendships, things like that. If you have a totally avoidant attachment style, you don't interact with anyone, and you're just like, I can't trust anyone. And then this reactive attachment style is like you know having a really hard time soothing yourself. So I remember seeing this in some kids when I did like inpatient child psychiatry rotations who maybe grew up in like an orphan. I specifically remember one case where the child grew up in an orphanage in like Russia or somewhere
Yeah.
like that and was adopted by a family who'd also adopted like 8 other kids, but adopted them at like age 9 or something. And the kid was having a really hard time adjusting. And it was
Mhm.
just like a lot of emotional dysregulation, really hard time feeling soothed, really hard time trusting that anyone is safe to soothe them. It's really sad to see. And so we think that, kids with reactive attachment disorder have a really disturbed internal working model of relationships. It's like the most severe version of an
Right.
attachment
Right.
disorder. And so that leads to a lot of interpersonal and behavioral problems later in life. Most of them have early childhood neglect, abuse, or both, especially in that ages 0 to 5 range, or early loss, like early tragic loss,
Hmm.
which then leads to, neglect or things like that, where their needs aren't met. And I think it's been connected to, I don't know the date off the top of my head, but things in adulthood like substance use disorder, mental health disorders, trouble maintaining jobs, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what's been your experience with it?
Similar, like just kind of working. I think it's been like some of the saddest cases I've
Hmm.
worked with,
I agree.
and just some of the ones that I feel like really sit with you and like I won't ever
Yeah.
forget. And I think that
Yeah.
just like speaks to, how many painful and terrible things that we see and work with families for. It's like this just
Yeah.
for me has really taken the cake, and
Yeah.
I think because treatment feels really difficult and challenging because so much of it has to do with the caregiver. And the
Yeah.
caregiver, really should be in their own therapy because it's so
It's
difficult.
really
You
hard.
you
Yeah.
have to almost be like it's almost like an impossible expectation, which no one's asking the parent to give or the caregiver to give, but like you have to really be kind of coaching constantly. Like
Yeah.
you're everything's kind of a goal. Everything's, even a hug. Like a lot of kids with reactive
Yes.
attachment disorder don't like to be touched.
Right.
So it's like, how can you
It can
show
actually
support
like,
and love? Yeah,
yeah, it can actually
freak
like
them out.
dysregulate them.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So,
And yeah,
it's just hard. So there's like, attachment therapy, play therapy, of course, for little ones. There's
I
some
think the
like
caregivers
residentials that like
yeah.
they do rad. Sometimes they send them home with a puppy. I've seen like to develop a bond with something. Um,
Yeah.
but
Because
it's
I was just
hard.
thinking, like, as you were saying that, like, right, like, so much of therapy, at least in adults,
Mm.
focuses on the therapeutic alliance, which means the connection between the patient and their therapist. And, like, time and
Mm.
time again, studies have shown, like, that is the strongest predictor of positive outcomes in therapy, is having that connection with your therapist. And for so many patients, if not, I would argue all of them, who have attachment struggles, whether they meet criteria for like a
Mhm.
full-fledged attachment disorder or they just have some, you know, like interpersonal stuff with their
Yeah.
parents that they're trying to work through, that gets like replicated in the
Mhm.
therapeutic relationship. And that can be like a great way to work on healing those wounds and learning how to like, trust other people, and like at least in like the psychodynamic work that I do. And that's going to be so hard
Mhm.
with someone with a reactive attachment style, because they're going to really struggle to form that alliance with their care,
Right.
like with a therapist. And I think that's like the whole goal, probably for a really long time in the therapy, is
Mhm.
just to connect and be a safe place, right? And similarly, like if you're adopting a child with this kind of
Mhm.
attachment style, like I think, but I'm sure we could do a better job, that like adoption agencies and stuff like help parents um, learn how
Yeah.
to relate to these kiddos and over time. But I don't actually know how much support, parents get who are adopting.
Yeah, I think that's hard, and I guess even thinking of some of the cases like where the belief is that it's some were from the kind of the international adoptions from places
Yeah.
in like Eastern Europe, where we
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
know historically there seems to be a lot of neglect, and then
Yeah.
other just like horrific cases of child abuse and neglect here.
Right. Just
And then
early, early
in
on.
adoption, and it's just so I mean so when we think of like the Grinch, I mean, I think there's also so the point of kind of bringing up reactive attachment disorders, there's so many things. So there's like antisocial personality disorder, people have like kind of talked about with him, depression, trauma,
Hmm.
of course. But it's like I think,
Yeah.
this was just like a little bit of a unique one, but he does demonstrate some of the criteria. So not liking physical touch. He wants to kind of be
Yep.
on his own. Being
Yep.
unhappy or sad. It says without a clear cause. I think we could take the trauma approach that there's always a clear cause with like abuse and neglect.
Right.
It's always coming from
Right.
somewhere, but um,
Right.
not really
Sometimes it's
expressing
not.
emotions
Yeah.
with like so having a conscience, like struggling with remorse or
Mm-hmm.
guilt. And
Mm-hmm.
then the detachment, withdrawal, kind of all
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. And in some, in terms of the DSM-5, how
Mm.
they sort of also, they also include some other symptoms that you might see in children with reactive attachment disorder, which includes things like poor hygiene, not meeting motor milestones, having trouble with like eye contact or social interactions, having blank expressions,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
appearing like unfocused, not responding socially appropriately to like in interpersonal
Mm.
interactions and stuff like that. And kind of all of that makes sense, right? Because you learn how to groom yourself from
Right.
your caregiver, right? Like your caregiver brushes your teeth, brushes your hair, gets you dressed before you know how to do that. So if no
Mm.
one's doing that for you, you don't know how to do it for yourself, right? And so I think you could also see how um I just think like a trauma informed approach is so important because you could see how someone with this attachment style could be misdiagnosed as like ADHD, ODD, conduct disorder. And sure, I think there might be a proportion of people with this early childhood trauma and attachment style who go on to develop those things, but that it might not actually be that, right?
Correct.
I think
Yeah.
that's
And I think
important to
that's
emphasize.
like the big years that I feel like that kind of comes out is more which is where the research with reactive attachment disorder is lacking and why it can be a little controversial is because there's no like long-term like
Yeah.
studies really about like what it turns into. They know a lot from like 0 to 5, but then after it's like are the kiddos kind of getting a secure attachment, working on it, developing the ability to have close, safe relationships, or is it kind of taking that other route where it's like they're
Yeah.
still not having any relationships and then the behaviors kind of naturally come out of that? It's not like the behaviors first. It's like you're kind of just on
Right.
your own in this big,
So how do
scary
you
world.
survive? Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Right. It's like the former way you described it is like what we see in this movie with the Grinch,
Hmm.
who he can develop this secure feeling with Cindy Lou.
Yeah.
Interestingly, a little child, right? And we always think like children are very pure and kind and so innocent, right? And as adults, we often say, like, gosh, when do we all become jerks? Like, when you're looking at little kids. Um, and interestingly, as you were saying that, Portia, I was just thinking, like, well, in order to do a long-term study, your participants have to keep participating, which in its of itself
Is a
is an
connection.
attachment.
Hmm.
So these people are not going to do that, right? If their attachment isn't
Right.
healing.
Right. Yeah. And I thought his heart growing was to me just
Yes.
like so symbolic of like him being, and again it's a movie and it's fast, but
Yeah.
like his healing and his ability to then
Yeah.
connect, and he kind of learned that through Cindy Lou Who, and then it's like safe to kind of try other attachments with Martha
Right.
and
Right.
his like caregivers he kind of
Yeah.
reunites with, and they put the sweater on him that's like itchy looking.
Yeah. But he can tolerate even that
Mhm.
scratchiness,
Right.
It is like such a beautiful metaphor, like for therapy in
Mm.
some ways, right? Like, I guess if Cindy Lou and the Grinch are engaging in like play therapy, I guess if you're following my drift, that like if you can develop that
Mhm.
connection and it can feel safe, and if someone in your life can see past all the acting out behaviors, stealing the presents, stealing the hoo hash, stealing all the lights, all this stuff the Grinch is doing in anger, which is sort of his way of like projecting out all the pain
Right.
he's holding inside from all of his early life experience. If there's someone in your life, again, hopefully an adult, not a child, hopefully someone well trained,
Mm.
someone in your life who can like hold on to and keep mirroring back to you that you do have goodness inside. You are worthy of love. Like, I see you for who you are, despite all your acting
Yeah.
out. I'm not going to leave you. Ooh, baby, is that powerful?
Mhm.
And don't you wish like everyone could have a
I
person like that in your
know.
life? I'm just thinking of like all the teenage boys I've seen in my work throughout the years who are just really acting out. And you're just like, God, you just need someone to love you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's tough. And
Yeah.
these behaviors make it hard to
Mm-hmm.
do that consistently, right? But like you really
Right.
need it.
Because they are so naturally kind of pushing others away, but it's like the core her purpose of that
Wound.
is to protect, you know?
Right.
So it's like while, others are kind of getting hurt or like, oh yeah, he's a jerk, I can't believe he did that. It's like, obviously some peers don't, I'm not asking them to have the capacity to do that, but like the
Right.
caregivers or the adults around or the teachers or the supports, the
Right.
therapists, it's like, well, why is this happening? And like,
Yeah.
how does it benefit him?
Right.
But he
Right.
also does have a dog. So now
Yes,
thinking about,
Max.
yeah,
Yes,
so
the
like,
animals.
was that a tiny little way that even while he was by himself, he was able to develop an attachment with an animal? And
I
that
think
made it
so.
easier for then with
Yes.
Cindy Lou, who's also like a little bit in a way, children are like animals, if you could go with
Yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
giving you that positive unconditional regard, like just
Right.
the consistency. I feel like children in a way are predictable in that way with like,
Right.
just sometimes emotions. And so maybe that like was the little crack that allowed
Yeah.
Cindy to kind of open the door.
And I think like that does speak to like why could his heart grow? Why
Mm.
could he start to develop this? I think because there's some ability there for that, right? Like he must have had some, however small, like thread of attachment that he knew it was possible. There was something in there, whether it was those two sisters that he learned to trust, whether like there was something there that led him to like getting the dog, right? And I mean, I've seen so many adult patients with a lot of attachment issues or trauma who like love like really really rely on their pets, right? And
Yeah.
then there's all of the emotional support animals, which can be exploited, you know but when it's appropriate, like it makes so much sense, right? Like even if it's hard to attach to humans because
Mm.
humans can be cruel, sometimes animals you can develop that attachment. So I think it does speak to the Grinch's ability to develop an attachment. However, it takes time and it
Yeah.
needs to be like in the right situation. But I think if he had been living alone like a hermit
Mm.
with no dog, with no desire, then there wouldn't be a story, there wouldn't be a movie, right? He like just wouldn't
Yeah.
go to the jubilation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he would just kind of be a hermit, right?
Mm-hmm. I had a question for you. Similarly, and I'm curious to hear your perspective about medication. So when I worked with some kiddos who had the diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, it felt like a similar
Mm-hmm.
medication mix for borderline, right? Like an
Yeah.
anti-anxiety, like a risperidol, sometimes with or
Yes.
risperidone with aggression. So what else do
Yeah.
you see? Or
Yeah. So again, I am not I'm not a trained child and adolescent psychiatrist, but I would agree with you in my brief training in child and adolescent psychiatry during my adult residency training. Um, it was hard because for a while I thought about pursuing child and adolescent, but then I didn't. And one big reason was because I felt like a lot of times as the psychiatrist, it was like expected that you would medicate symptoms
yeah,
that at least like on the inpatient settings, I kept thinking like, you know, they're acting this way because of their home life or because of their parents or like they're behaving and
totally.
reacting, not like medicine isn't going to fix that. Like I would always say to my supervisors, like, I wish I could just prescribe them new parents. Like, I just want to give them like a loving parent. Or, and Dr. Q, one of my favorite, teachers of all time, when she would be interviewing kiddos and stuff who were coming on the unit, she would get a good sense of like what's their relationship like with their parents, and then also ask them questions like, who do you go to when you're sad, or who can you talk to when you have a question, trying to gauge like, is there someone else in your life, a coach, a teacher, is there someone?
Yeah.
And if there was someone, kind of like the Grinch, there must have been someone
Mm.
that you hope you can like foster that relationship. But I would agree with you. I feel like in terms of the medication side, um, I think you often end up like medicating certain symptoms in hopes it'll help keep the kid like in quote unquote behavioral control. And that always just like rubbed me the wrong way
Hmm.
because it feels like we're not treating the deeper thing, or like the root cause. But then it's also like, well, how do you get to the root cause if the behaviors are interfering? It's really complicated, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree with you. I think we see, and sometimes that's appropriate. Like sometimes when you have patients with something like borderline personality disorder, it is helpful for them to be on a couple different medications to help treat the different symptoms so that they're in a place of emotional
Mm.
stability where they can make use of, DBT or play therapy if it's a kid. It's just, I think, really hard with kids when the medications we're using can have so many side effects. So it's a really nuanced decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it just makes it hard. And like I think we both have
Yeah.
said 10 times today, but like it's attachment is so tricky. And I think right the most like vulnerable people are kiddos, and it's just
Yes.
like can be heartbreaking when like basic needs aren't met, there's abuse, and then of course, like that they're still not in a good place. And I don't know. But
I
another,
totally agree.
kind of just quick note about the Grinch is I thought it was funny someone it made me think of like what is it? SAD.
Seasonal affective
Seasonal affective
disorder.
disorder. And it's like it's always winter there. Like it's always
Yeah.
like it's always holiday stress, right? So
Oh,
it's like it's this perpetual like
can you imagine?
experience.
Like on the one hand, it's like, wow, it might be nice to live in Christmas time all the time. But then on the other, it's like, that's so much pressure,
Hmm.
like such high expectations. And we see that with like the competition between the neighbors with how many lights you get on your house. And then there's even like the mayor's wife who has like a Barbie body, right? Who's like using that like light
Yeah.
gun to like get all the lights. It's like, that's why I like loved this version of the movie because it just like speaks to that stress in such a comical way.
And it's like also for adults with like right like
Yeah.
seeing Martha like doing the gun and like shooting in that like a little bit like sensual way.
Yeah.
It was funny. Yeah.
It's funny. Oh,
It's a
I
good
love
movie,
it.
and it's
It's a
definitely a
good
part of the must watch list
must
for
watch.
me, at least for the holidays.
Yeah, I love it.
Hmm.
And I love this version. I just love Jim Carrey. Like, who doesn't?
Yeah.
But he's such a good Grinch. It's so good.
Hmm. Yeah. 10 out of 10 recommend. So
10 out of
thank
10.
you for, listening today. I think we're going to wrap up. It
We'd
was
love
a,
to hear your thoughts
yeah.
about this classic movie. What do you think about the Grinch's attachment
Mm.
style? Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely let us know. You can reach us on many social media accounts like TikTok or Instagram at Analyze Scripts Podcast. You can also leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can always email us at
Yeah.
analyzescriptspodcast@gmail. We'd like to hear your take. This
And
was a
we
little
should
bit
talk
of new
about,
info.
yeah, let's talk about the giveaway.
Yeah,
I believe this episode is going to come out before the giveaway. Let me double check.
Monday. I think it won't that Monday. Like
Uh,
well, sorry.
I mean, it could.
Well, if
Can we cut this out?
you should check our Instagram, and if there is the still giveaway going on, we're giving away $200 of an Amazon gift card as a way to say thank you to our listeners. If it's not,
Yeah.
we'll probably maybe do it again at some point, maybe
Yeah,
next
we
year.
might do it again another
So
time.
make sure
Yeah.
you're following us. You could see the
Yeah.
opportunity to give us some feedback, and we'll definitely be taking some of the suggestions that have been on that post. And again, please leave us
It's
some. We'd love
great.
to hear your feedback. But thanks for
Yeah,
joining us.
we're having a great time and we love all the interaction. And catch us next week for our last episode of 2023. We will be covering Christmas Vacation, which is just such a classic. It's one of Portia's favorites. It will be released on Christmas Day. So, if you need a little mental health break, from all the festivities and you want to give it a listen, that's great.
Yeah, no, good note. All right, take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye. That was